Hello, my name is Joe Minihane and I'm the author of Floating, A Return to the Waterlog. My book is all about wild swimming all around the UK in a bid to conquer anxiety and to learn about Roger Deakin's seminal Waterlog. I swam in all of the places that he swam in his seminal 1999 book, except for Kenilworth Lido, which he mentions right at the start of the book, but unfortunately I didn't get a chance to visit. Now, I understand that there are a lot of issues around Kenilworth Lido and that actually it looks like it's going to be closed down for good. This, to me, is just an act of civic vandalism. Moving a Lido indoors isn't going to help anybody. It's not really going to help save the environment. And actually, at this particular time during the pandemic, being able to swim outdoors, being able to be in touch with nature is so important, not just for our physical health, but for our mental health as well. So what I'd like to do is to read a section from my book about swimming in the Vale of Evesham in the River Avon. So this is it. This is a short passage from when I swam in the Avon back in 2014. Cropthorne Watermill at Flatbury on the River Avon was a private affair, and I'd been invited to swim there by the owner, George, after I'd done some detective work, found his email address and written to him about my trip. His cousin Judith had asked Roger down in the 1990s, having seen one of his newspaper articles on wild swimming. The Environment Agency had seemingly wanted to go to war with Judith's family for having the temerity to paddle in these waters. A letter spoke of the considerable risks of jumping into the Avon and the need to take children to a local swimming pool instead. It clearly hadn't deterred them. George and his son John, who had collected me from the train station at Evesham, led me down to the river from the road, ringing a bell and hauling the punt from the mill on the far bank. Attached to a pulley, it stood across the water, a huge group of 15 swimmers awaiting our arrival on the other side. It was everything I had hoped for. In my email to George, I'd asked if I could possibly come down, snoop about, and perhaps go on a long swim upstream. And I thought I'd be the only one taken to the water, pushing off and turning back for London within an hour or two. But already everyone had changed into their swimming kit, ready to join in. After the briefest of introductions to young cousins, grandparents and spouses, I was ushered into a back room of the mill to put on my shorts before being led up to the living room on the first floor by John and his brother. I knew what was coming. Deakin mentions that swimmers here jumped out of the window into the Avon far below, but he doesn't say whether he did it. It seemed I had no choice in the matter. John ushered me forward to look out of the window. I thought it was a sheer drop out into the river, but there was a 4-foot wide path skirting the mill which needed to be cleared first. John clambered into the frame of the window, which stood a few inches from the floor, stretched his long tanned arms backwards, and catapulted himself out into the open. A huge splash and the odd cheer told me he'd made it safely. His younger brother James was next. He was 14 and just a few inches shy of 6 feet. Gangly but extremely confident, he disappeared and emerged soaked and smiling. I tried to remember being his age, memories of failing to flop into the deep end during school swimming lessons once again resurfacing. If these teenagers seemed fearless, it was because they were. George watched behind me as I moved up to the window and looked out. By now, everyone downstairs was watching, eyeing me gleefully for any signs of weakness. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to walk back to the riverbank, slip in and swim away as fast as possible on a solo exploration. I closed my eyes, the faces of my old classmates gawping and jeering at my 11-year-old self haunting the darkness. I couldn't let my hosts down. I hung back in the frame, kept my eyes shut tight, began counting to 3 and jumped on 2. I felt my legs wheeling and then disappeared into the green water. I emerged gasping to a round of applause. John took my arm and helped pull me out, smiling. His long curly hair was slick across his face, his board shorts slung low. You made it by about 4 inches, he said. Good effort. I imagined my heels cracking on the edge of the path, my body sliding forward helplessly into the water. What if I had been the person to end the halcyon days of wild swimming here in Flatbury? I imagined the paramedics arriving, shuttling across on the pulley ferry, strapping me to a stretcher. I pictured myself with metal pins through my legs and wearing protective boots on both feet for the next year, a short article on the BBC News website remarking on my idiocy. George and his family having to sell up because of my poor jumping skills, never returning to a place that had brought them so much happiness. Years of anxiety had made me an expert at making imaginary mountains out of non-existent molehills. What ifs were my forte. Once I'd let my overactive imagination work through this implausible scenario, I realised that I was actually in the grip of an intense adrenaline rush. It was a heady mix of the feeling I got after a long cold dip and the joy of abandon I felt after my stolen swims on the River Itchen. I had found my rebellion in jumping out of millhouse windows. Dried off but still shaking, I took my seat around the large picnic table, listening to Test Match Special with George's friend Mark and his kids. England were in the process of demolishing the Aussies for the 3rd home series in a row. Mark, a healthy-looking guy in his mid-50s, had been coming here ever since he was young and told me how proud he was to see his children still able to enjoy the kind of daring activities he and George had indulged in. They were all excellent swimmers, happily practicing dives and playfully pushing each other under, enjoying what I saw as a proper old-style summer holiday. I had thought my feat of daring do was enough for the day, but George and Mark had different ideas, talking about erecting a high board on the punt. I had thought this idle chatter until I saw George disappear into the far corner of the garden and start dismantling a hitherto unseen platform, usually used for decorating and DIY. Slowly it came down before being re-erected stage by stage on the rickety little vessel. Balanced precariously on either side, George lay a final board about 3 meters up, and so began an impromptu diving contest. One by one, the cousins came forward, climbing high, the entire makeshift creation swaying violently as they stood, fingertips pointing to the sky before diving forward. John's efforts were spectacular, but Mark's 11-year-old twin daughters were incredible, unafraid of toppling in and clearly loving the cold crush of the Avon around them. They went in turns, practicing tumbles, tucks and somersaults, as if jumping from a creaking alloy tower was the most normal thing in the world. I had found myself in a watery paradise. That was until it was my turn. I scaled the makeshift construction slowly, again watched by the extended family, grins and shouts of encouragement abounding. They'd seen my near disastrous window leap, and they were ready for more light entertainment. I made no mention of the fact that I didn't particularly enjoy heights, particularly ones where it involved throwing myself off into the unknown. I remembered the brief feeling of fearlessness I found in the window frame and let myself half jump, half flop into the river. It was a pathetic effort considering the rest of the talent on show. John filmed it all on his smartphone, and I cringed as I watched myself back, a 31-year-old man shown up by a bunch of kids who'd never known the fear of water. So you can buy specially signed copies of Floating at the Kenilworth Bookshop now. There's a display with lots of other fantastic wild swimming books there. If you do go out this summer and you're wanting to swim, just remember to be really, really safe. Assess all the conditions around you. If it feels like it's not safe, just don't go in. Enjoy the view of the water and happy swimming. Stay safe.